Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to TechGeek webinar series, our endeavor to empower techies. We believe that sharing of knowledge is the key to enhance our skills and grow us as professionals. With this principle in mind, we have initiated a series of webinars conducted by industry experts to give you all a crisp insight of various domains. The topic of today's session is looking at Windows Azure as a infrastructure as a service. And this is the fourth session in the cloud computing series that we have going on TechGeek. Our guest speaker today is Mr. Nilesh N. Vatke, Principal Education and Research, Infosys Limited. Nilesh is Microsoft Certified Windows Azure Developer and IBM Certified Solution Advisor for Cloud Computing Architecture. He gathers an overall experience of 17 plus years in the areas of information technology and engineering, Windows Azure and application lifecycle management are his key areas of work along with management-related responsibilities. So without further delay, I introduce you all to our guest speaker. Over to you, Mr. Nilesh.
Thanks. Yes. So thanks for that introduction, and now let's get started and look at this topic in brief. As mentioned by the moderator, the topic for today is looking at Windows Azure as infrastructure as a service. Now, when I say this, what are we going to talk about in today's discussion is a brief of what the Windows Azure platform is all about. I also understand that there was a session on Friday taken by Sabah Halim on Introduction to Windows Azure. So I will try to slightly build upon that and give a context to what I'm going to talk about. Many people in this session may not be aware of what the infrastructure as a service is, which is referred to as IaaS, and similarly platform as a service and software as a service. So we'll spend some time on this topic to understand what do we mean by infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service, and how do we differentiate that, and who are the various players today in the market into this particular platform services. And the key focus of our today's webinar will be on the two major features of Windows Azure related to infrastructure as a service, and these two features are virtual network and virtual machines. Basically, virtual network is a service provided by Microsoft on their Windows Azure platform to create a virtual network on demand based on your requirement, and then deploy your infrastructure services like virtual machines and other components onto it. So today's webinar will focus on this, and towards the end and in between as well, I'll show you the demonstrations of how do we do that, and show you a complete end-to-end demo on how to create a virtual network, how do you create a virtual machine, and then connect from a remote site. So that's the agenda for today's discussion. So let's go on further and speak about the differences between infrastructure as a service, platform, and software as a service. So I'm on the next slide. If you see today's cloud computing model, the various services that a cloud service provider offers to its customers. So here are a few of them, not all. What I have highlighted, IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS, is what our focus for today will be. But however, these are the three popular service models that the cloud computing services are broken into. However, apart from that, you also have a security as a service that you see on the top right of the screen. Then you have network as a service, data as a service. Then you also have storage as a service, and you also have a testing environment as a service. So you have various cloud computing models which are there, but as I said earlier, the popular ones are infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. So let's try to understand and differentiate and compare the three key cloud computing models. So I want to start bottom up on this particular slide. if you see at the bottom, I have infrastructure as a service. Now, when some cloud provider offers a specific set of services, how do you identify whether that particular service is a infrastructure as a service or what it is? So the services offered under infrastructure as a service are the storage services, where you are given a mechanism to store your data, to do some processing of your data, or you have some networking capabilities along with other computing resources. So if I want to compare this with a normal 3-tier deployment architecture, what do we have when you deploy a, let's say, a website? Basically, you need to have a hardware. On the hardware, what you need is you have a OS and a platform where you can host your applications. For example, people from Java background might understand when I say on your OS you have a web server. Similarly, on the Microsoft stack, you'll have IaaS as a web server or application server. So you have a base hardware on which you have a platform like OS and the required software platform to host your application. And then on top of it lies your application. So if I try to compare this analogy, when I say I need a hardware to host my application, so if this hardware support, if this virtualized hardware is what is given by a cloud service provider, then that service is categorized as a infrastructure as a service. Now at times what will happen is you also want that, okay, along with the infrastructure, it will be good for me to get a platform also, so my headache of maintaining the platform goes away. So there are cloud providers which will provide infrastructure as a service, that is your hardware resources. They will also provide a basic software platform on which you can deploy or develop your applications. So when you get these two, hard infrastructure as well as platform, that's where a cloud service provider gets categorized as a platform as a service provider. And then when you move up on the screen, you have software as a service, where great, you have a infrastructure support, you have a platform support, and to top it, you also have applications. For example, you have applications like SharePoint running on the cloud, Exchange running on the cloud. To be very, very simple, Google Mail is an example where you get a ready-made application which you can use, and you just have to start using the application. That's where it comes into the category of software as a service. So there are some buzzwords which you can remember as a key takeaway from this. So basically what you do is, on IaaS, infrastructure as a service, basically you get something to host on. On platform as a service, you get something to build upon. So you get a hosting environment in IaaS, you get a build environment on platform, and you get a ready application which you can consume on the software as a service. So if you see the stack, that you have, basically there are multiple components. Again, starting from bottom, the components that basically you have are servers that you need. You need a storage space, you need virtualization if you want to handle multiple users, and then you need networking support. On top of this, you also need an operating system and a middleware or runtime where you can put your application or your data. So in case of infrastructure as a service, what is managed by you and what is managed by a vendor is the key. In infrastructure as a service, the cloud provider, or referred to as vendor, is managing virtualization related activities on the server, storage and networking, whereas you manage, as a developer, you manage the application that is on SAS, you manage the platform where you host your application. So similarly, when you move one level up and consume platform as a service, apart from the infrastructure services, what is also managed by vendor is the operating system, the runtime, and the middleware, which also means that your job of maintaining the OS, patching it up, upgrading the OS to a specific need, installing the required middlewares is taken away from you. That is managed by the vendor. But obviously, as you move up this ladder from IaaS to SaaS, the maintenance cost that you would incur is given to the vendor. At the same time, there are disadvantages of doing that, or in fact I can say there are multiple scenarios where I can use or choose a specific thing. When you go up to a SaaS level, you have less control, whereas when you are at the bottom of the stack at infrastructure level, you have more control. So to summarize quickly on this, you lose control as you move up. From IaaS, when you move to PaaS, from PaaS, when you move to SaaS, you keep losing control on the total environment. Whereas if you talk about the ease of maintenance, that increases. You just have to focus on applications. You just have to focus on how the application will behave in case of SaaS. You don't have to bother about the platform, nor you have to bother about IaaS. So that is the key difference between infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. So more and more you move to a software as a service, you have rich features provided by the vendor, you have less control, and probably a higher cost because the vendor is going to maintain things for you. So with this, the question comes, what about Windows Azure? Initially, when Microsoft launched Windows Azure, Microsoft provided the platform as a service features. So if you see this, I'm just going to take you to a web page quickly where you can see the complete Microsoft stack, how they have categorized things. So here is where the complete Microsoft stack is. You can see Windows Azure gives you huge set of features. It gives you cloud services, websites, mobile services which are recently launched under compute, and other things like app services, Azure Directory, caching. So it gives you a complete stack of services required from platform to software. So Windows Azure, basically when it was launched as platform as a service, focusing key on the cloud services, the storage that you have here, the SQL data storage that you have, SQL reporting. So these are the key things which were launched where you talk about Windows Azure as a platform as a service. However, when this platform matured, there was a need felt to also provide the infrastructure as a service on Windows Azure. And that is the time when we had the connect services, you have virtual network, and you have virtual machines. So these are the key components which fall under infrastructure as a service component of Windows Azure. I repeat, connect, virtual network, and virtual machines are those key components of Windows Azure platform, which comes under your infrastructure as a service. So that's the focus of today's session. I'm sure this was dealt in depth in the overview session which was done on Friday. So I don't repeat the same thing again, but however, I'll focus on the IaaS features that we intend to do so in this particular session. So coming to the first topic for the day, that is from an IaaS stack of Windows Azure, you have virtual network. All of us have worked on networking. We know what a network means. We have seen our companies setting up networking details for us. However, when I say virtual network, this basically is a virtual private network on the Microsoft Cloud. This component deals with how to manage your virtual private network on the Windows Azure. The virtual network really helps you to set connectivity between two sites. When I say two sites, one site could be on the cloud, other side could be on premise. So that's where virtual network component acts as a very, very secure link between your Windows Azure platform and on-premise network. There are other components which allows you, instead of a site-to-site connectivity, there are other components which allows you to do a point-to-point connectivity, a PC-to-PC connectivity, and that component of Windows Azure is Azure Connect. I repeat, that is called as Azure Connect. But currently that is in CTP, and there are no much concrete plans of taking that product to release. So to focus on site-to-site connectivity, virtual network is one of the best solutions that Microsoft provides you to create a virtual private network. You can have your own address space. You can specify, I'll show you a demo on that. You can specify how to create your own address space, which is a private address space on your cloud, and then use that address space to host your virtual machines onto it. So we're going to do a demo, complete demo on that. One thing when as architect, we have to decide how the topology of virtual network will be, because currently the way it is designed is once you start deploying virtual machines onto the network, on this virtual network, it slightly becomes difficult. So it's a word of caution to be very, very sure of what you're going to create, what kind of network you're going to create, because changing the topology later after installing or deploying the virtual machines is a big tedious activity. So that's something that one should be taking care of. So what are different scenarios where you feel you can use this? Obviously, the first scenario that could come to your mind when you see the second bullet on the slide is, yeah, if I need a hybrid scenario where I want to have connectivity between my existing on-premise setup and to have a virtual network on the cloud, definitely this is a very effective solution to build hybrid solutions on the cloud. Along with this, if you want to expand your data center, so today we have maintenance issues, we have space issues, we have security issues on your on-premise networks. So expanding your data center to the cloud becomes very, very easy, and if you architect it properly, it also is a cost-effective solution. There were some recent revisions which happened to the virtual network management portal, which is on Windows Azure. So currently this product that I'm talking about, virtual network, is into preview. So that's why I thought everyone here hearing to this webinar should quickly have early say or early scenario on how this virtual network works. It's free, currently it's free as it's in preview, but the plans of Microsoft are to charge it at 5 cents per connection hour. When I say 5 cents per VPN connection hour, basically if there are 5 nodes connecting to the network over VPN, so it becomes 5 cents into 5, so that will cost you 25 cents per hour. So the pricing mechanism for virtual network is based on connection hour in your VPN. But as of now, you can enjoy it free. There is no official date as of now when this product will be going into release version, but very soon it should happen, and after that the charging will start. So let's see a quick demo on how things work for this. So I'm sure by now you know that Windows Azure is accessible from the Windows Azure management portal. So right now I am on the browser. I have already logged in into the management portal. The URL of the management portal is manage.windowsazure.com. You can see that highlighted on the screen. The people who have access to it can enjoy this services at free for now. People who don't have access to Azure, let me take a moment to tell you, you can go to windowsazure.com and you can use a free trial option where you can get a free access using your live ID. So if you see here, I have accessed my Windows Azure portal, that is manager.windowsazure.com, using my live ID. So you can see you have options like networks, and you have options like virtual machines, which are focused for today's webinar. So as I said, let's go to virtual network, and here on this virtual network you can go ahead and create a new virtual network in this. So this is a clean slate which I'm starting from, so that you get a complete overview. So I can create a virtual network from here, or I have a new option from where I can go ahead and create a virtual network. So here you see multiple options as well. You can create a virtual network by importing the configuration file. So we'll talk about this a bit later. You can also register a DNS server, which can be used to give and connect to your local network as well. So if you see a custom create option, so let me do that. So I'm giving a name to my virtual network. Now Windows Azure is into various data centers across the globe. So I choose Southeast Asia is where my virtual network should get created. So I'm using this name, which should be unique again, and then I'm choosing a region where my virtual network should be created. Then you have to create an affinity group where you can specify all the components into one single region. So I can, if I have an existing affinity group, I can use that, or I can create a new affinity group so that all my components of this remain into a same zone. So this is what my I've given some name to the affinity group. So let's move ahead, and here's where you can start. If you remember, I spoke about you having a control of specifying the private address space of what you want. So you can create your own address space, and also you can create a subnets. So let's do that. So you can choose what kind of IP type you want. I'll choose these segments, and I can specify how many IP addresses do I want to reserve. So for now, let me say I will go with some starting IP address and say, okay, I want to reserve 16 IP addresses ranging from this to this. If needed, I can also create subnets. So for hosting and deploying my applications, I can say this is my web subnet, where I can choose, okay, out of this address range, I create one subnet which will have the IP restrictions from this. Second, I can have another IP range. Automatically it will take the next range. So if you notice this, here is where I can choose the IP address range, and I can also choose what kind of segments I want. So here I have selected IP range for 16 addresses and created two subnets of 8 addresses each. Moving ahead, if needed, I can choose the name of the DNS server, and then I can specify what is the IP address that I want to provide to my DNS. Now you may want to choose this option if you want that this DNS server should be used to configure to your local network as well. So here is where I have started creating a virtual network. The virtual network will be initialized, and this is the group that I have mentioned, and you will see you have the virtual network getting ready for our use. If you move on this, you can get to know on that virtual network, for a particular virtual network, what are the subnets, what is the DNS server, and all those details you can get through it. Similarly, if your virtual network is getting connected to a specific local network, you can also add a local network and then use these DNS server options to go ahead and connect to your local network. So what I'm going to do now is, once my virtual network is ready, I'm going to export these settings on my local machine. Now if you recollect, I mentioned there are multiple options. You can create a virtual machine from an existing configuration file. So I did not create configuration file from scratch. You very well can do that, but if you already have a template, so which means I can use this as a setting and download the virtual network settings, and that becomes my network file. So I can export this. I can export network configuration to a local machine. And if you see this, let me open this network configuration.xml file. I'll save it on my desktop, and then I'll open it from here. If you see this, what are settings we had done, including the DNS server entry, what are the address space which I have used, what are the subnets that I have used, all this gets used or saved as a network configuration file. So when you want to create a new network, what basically you can do is you can import and browse this configuration file, assume it's modified, updated, and your virtual network gets created from the network configuration file as well. So you have this option. If you don't want to go with this, you have a wizard-based option where you can go ahead and create a virtual network based on the way I did it. So your virtual network is ready. It is created for you now, and you can start using it. If you see the details, here is what you have. So you have a virtual network ID that have got created, all these address spaces that we have, what is DNS server. So all these details are present now on the network. You may not appreciate it now, but you'll appreciate it much more when we start hosting a network component. When I say network component, I mean a virtual machine onto this network. So this is one part, and a very easy part of how you create or delete or export your virtual network. Assume now it's ready. Let's move on to the next topic for today, and it was virtual machines. Earlier, when Windows Azure was launched, you had options like web role and worker role. Those were the virtual machines provided under the platform as a service stack. Under that stack, you had option to host your applications on existing Windows OS. So there are two things. One, when you go with web role and a worker role, you don't have control over the VM. Second, the only OS which was available to you was Windows Server. So there were a lot of customers looking for a Linux-based virtual machine, a virtual machine where the end user or the administrator can have a control on. And that's where, to relief of all these users, Microsoft launched the Windows Azure virtual machine. These virtual machines, which you create on the Windows Azure infrastructure as a service platform, the Microsoft Windows Azure platform, these images are of two types. They definitely have continued Windows Server and added to the stack on Linux as well. So Windows Server comes with two flavors. Windows Server, you can have a Windows Server 2008 configured VM, or you can have a Windows Server 2012 VM. So you can choose which OS you want. You either want 8 or 12. You don't have support for the older versions than this. And now you also have control, or you can have a choice of which flavor of Linux that you want. So today you have dual option. You can choose Linux, you can choose Windows Server as a virtual machine base for hosting your applications. Like I said earlier, in web role and the worker role, you had little control on the virtual machine. But in this case, in this component of the service platform, you have full control on your VM. You create a VM and then you choose what to deploy, how to deploy on that. Now, when you do all these settings, when you install, when you deploy your applications on these VMs, the good part of that is all this gets stored as a persistent storage. Now, the persistent storage in Windows Azure are of two types. You can have the Windows Azure storage device, storage mechanisms under blob, tables, and queues, or you have a storage mechanism which is RDBMS on Windows Azure platform is SQL Azure, and now it is called as SQL databases. However, the data of virtual machine, that the settings that you do, the installation that you do, all things get stored as a blob. Blob is one of the storage options available on Windows Azure platform. So you don't lose anything. All settings that you do are stored as virtual hard disk inside your storage account. I repeat. So whatever settings you do for your machines, they are stored as virtual hard disk. They are stored as VHD files, and these VHD files are stored as under the block storage of Windows Azure. Now, this block storage that is used for VHD files, it is, to be more precise, it is a page blob. There are two types of blob storage. There are blobs and page blobs. VHD files, which are susceptible for huge read writes, frequent read writes, and storing large amount of data, the page blobs are getting used to store this information, and that is where your Windows Azure virtual machines are persistent in nature. They keep all your settings. To add to this, you also have support for doing a load balancing. You can have multiple virtual machines, and then you can load balance the requests which are coming to the set of load balanced virtual machines. So when your load increases, currently let's say you have a scenario where you have hosted one virtual machine and you have application that is growing in popularity. So what you do is you add a set of virtual machines and then you load balance your request across these load balanced virtual machines. This is a very good option which I'm going to show you when we do a demo. So we saw some scenarios when you can use virtual network. Similarly, the two top scenarios where you may want to choose virtual machines is, one, if you have an existing application running on premise and you want to move that onto Windows Azure Cloud, you have two options again. You wrap or you package your existing application as a web role or a worker role depending upon the type of application, and then host it on the Microsoft Azure platform as a service components, which are a web role or a worker role. But you will not have more control on the VM, and it will take some time. You need a developer support to do that. However, if you want to just migrate from on-premise to your cloud, what you can do is you can create a virtual hard disk. You can create a VHD file from your Windows Server 2008 machine or Windows Server 2012 machine. You can create a VHD file using the tools which are available at the OS level itself, and these VHDs can be transferred onto the cloud into the storage. Like I mentioned, these VHD files can go to blob storage on Windows Azure, and then using those VHD files you can create a virtual machine on the cloud. There could be a question, what about licensing? The way it goes is something like this. We have a licensed Windows Server 2008 on premise. When you create a VHD and migrate that VHD onto Windows Azure, the Microsoft Azure platform manages the licensing for that, which means every Windows Server 2008 or 2012 virtual machine which gets created on the cloud, Microsoft will manage the licenses. The virtual machine cost is inclusive of the maintenance cost as well as the licensing cost for Windows. For Linux, there will be no licensing cost involved, and that's why when I show you the next slide, you will see that from a costing perspective, the Windows OS are a bit costlier than the Linux-based operating system virtual machines. That's because the licensing is included in that. Now imagine a reverse situation where you want to take your virtual machine to on-premise. So when you take your virtual machine from your cloud onto your on-premise, at that time you will have to include manually the licensing key for the OS when you deploy it on your network. So I repeat, from on-premise to the cloud, Microsoft will take care of licensing of Windows servers, whereas from the reverse way, from the cloud, when you move back to your on-premise network, you as a IT pro or IT developer will have to key in your licensing details onto that particular OS. Again, this product is in preview, but it's not free. We can see the costing a bit later. This is a very, very important slide. It talks about the key things that are comprising into a virtual machine. A virtual machine basically has three things. You have an image, you have the operating system disk, and then you have a data disk. Data disk is something that is discussed in the next slide. So when you create or when you start creating a new VM, obviously you may want to use a specific template. The template will either be a Windows Server 2008-2012 template, or it can be a Linux template. So the template that you use to create a virtual machine is called as an image. This template will not contain any computer specific or user specific settings. This is a blank template having the OS components, but definitely not the OS customizations onto it. So the image is a scratch or a base disk that you can think of, which is used to create a VM. So you use the image, you create a VM. While the VM gets created, the image that you have gets converted as a OS disk. So the image that you have used here, while you provision it as a virtual machine, the image gets converted as an operating system disk. And this operating system disk is something that is stored in your storage mechanism on Azure. This disk will have the OS customizations, the user customizations, and whatever applications you may want to install, that will be available onto this. So this is what is your operating system disk. This is the disk which is now ready with your OS, is now ready with your OS customizations and user applications. This is that BSD file that can be booted from, or it can be mounted as a working OS. Image cannot be mounted as a working OS because it does not have the admin user, it does not have customizations. Whereas the operating system disk is something that can be mounted or booted as a working OS. So we spoke about images, we spoke about operating system disk. Now I think we'll have to discuss in depth about the data disk, also sometimes called as storage disk. So it is that disk which is used to store application specific data and not OS specific data. The way your machine will have a C, D, E drives, multiple hard drives and partitions. Similarly, your virtual machine will basically have two drives by default. I'm talking from a Windows perspective. The Windows virtual machine will have a C drive which will have all the OS specific details, and another drive which is a D drive which will be available again on each of the VM. And this is like a swap disk. This is like a temporary disk where your OS, your processes and your applications will use this disk as a transient or a temporary storage. If you want something to be stored permanently, for example, let's say user specific information, application specific information, you can create a new disk and attach. The way you open up a CPU, add a hard disk, configure it, create a partition, in the same way here also what you have to do is you create a new disk virtually, attach it to a VM and assign a drive later, assign a partition later. In my demo, I'm going to demonstrate this. We are going to create a virtual machine. On the virtual machine, I'll show you what is your operating system disk, what is your temporary storage disk, that is drive D, and then we'll also see that you have a data disk which you can create and attach to an existing VM. So let's see, when you create a VM, you'll have questions like, what is the size of the VM? Can I have a 5 GB RAM VM? Can I have a 1 TB disk VM? So let's see that. The capacity of the VM comes in 5 sizes. The sizes vary from extra small to extra large. And you can see on the screen, you have a set of predefined number of cores, predefined memory, and if you want to customize, that's something which is not allowed right now. You have to choose one of it. So you cannot say, I want a 4 CPU core machine with 3.5 GB RAM. That's something which is not recommended right now. You have to choose either of this. You can choose extra small or in this sequence up to extra large. So if I choose medium virtual machine as a size, I get a 2 CPU core machine with 3.5 GB RAM. And for temporary storage, which we spoke about in the earlier slide, I get around 135 GB space for my temporary storage of my data. And how many more disks can I add? I can add 4 more data disks, and each of them can range from 1 GB to max of 1 TB. So which simply means I can have one virtual machine with 2 cores, 3.5 GB RAM, and then apart from my base OS disk and my temporary disk, I can have 4 disks of 1 TB each. That's the max capacity I can have. So that's pretty much sufficient for application to host and to store data. When it comes to costing or pricing, you can see this. We just spoke about these figures just now, so let's ignore it right now. Let's focus on this part. What is the pricing right now? So as I told you, it's in the preview stage. It's not free in the preview as well. So if I choose a small virtual machine, which means I have to pay 8 cents per hour. So approximately, if you calculate that, it comes to around $58 per month. So that's pretty much okay. I get a full-fledged virtual machine with no headache for me to maintain that. From a hardware perspective, it's purely managed by Microsoft because they provide you the infrastructure as a service support. And then when you move ahead, the same VM, when it is made as a general availability, the rates will change. The rates will be a bit higher than what you see right now. As I mentioned earlier, you can see from this stage, even from here, small, medium, large, extra large, you should not be surprised why come Windows, being Microsoft itself, why come Windows VMs are costlier than the Linux VMs, the non-Windows VMs. As I told you, these VMs also include your licensing cost of your Windows Server. So let's move on to the demo now. I'm back to the browser. I already have a virtual network. Now what I do is I create a new virtual machine. So when I create a new virtual machine, again I have an option to choose what kind of virtual machine I want. do I want a Windows Server 2008 or a 12 virtual machine, or I can choose a suite of Linux OSs for my virtual machine. Let's say I want Windows Server 2012, and then what size I want. We just sorry, we just spoke about the sizes. The sizes vary from extra small, small, medium, and large. So, or if you don't want to choose this option, you can go ahead and choose huge set of images from here as well. So I can have a pre-configured SQL Server machine with a Windows Server 2008 R2 and SQL Server 2012. Similarly, I can have BizTalk and a combination of Windows Server 2012. This is one way where you can look for various images. Your existing machines and images will come here under My Image and My Disk. If you want more images, you can simply go and browse set of images which are there from the virtual machine depot. So if you go here, you can see a huge set of virtual machines available pre-configured. For example, if you see this Apache, you have Apache server on Linux into this image. So you can choose which image to use for. So let me quickly go to virtual machine, and I'll create a virtual machine which has plain Windows Server 2008 SP1. Now, when was it released? You can see this image was released. Which version of that you want? I want the latest version, which was released recently. Virtual machine name, administrator, username is administrator, password I can specify. So this becomes my password for the username administrator. Then I can choose which one do I want from here. Do I want a standalone virtual machine or connect to an existing virtual machine? As I mentioned earlier, you can connect to an existing virtual machine to do load balancing. You recollect what I said earlier. So you can do a load balancing between this as well. So I select a standalone as of now. Now this virtual machine will have a disk. This virtual machine will have a VSD where this virtual machine disk should be stored. Again, go back to what we discussed earlier. It should be stored in some storage account. I can create a new storage account automatically, or I can choose which one to have. Now here is the key. Where do I deploy this virtual machine? I can deploy this virtual machine in a specific region, or I can choose to pick up the virtual network which I created earlier. So I'm specifying, okay, this virtual network I want to host. I want to host this virtual machine on this virtual network, and in which subnet. Again, depending on what you choose, the IP of that machine will be from that particular subnet. And then I can choose a new user. Again, this is from a failover perspective. And now I start creating a virtual machine. Remember, I had given the default username called as administrator, for which I had given my own password. And once this virtual machine is provisioned, you can see that you'll also have a disk which you can associate to that. So it will take around 2 to 3 minutes to provision this particular thing. So at the same time, what you can do is, while this gets provisioned, I'll continue further and create one more virtual machine from a gallery, and here in this case I will select Linux. So I do this as well. I can choose what username I want. I can choose what kind of VM size I want to choose, and then start creating again a standalone virtual machine. choose a specific subnet again, or in this time I can choose a normal region as well. So anything that we want to, and then create something, some availability set from a load from a availability perspective for failover. And here you can see the status of the virtual machines getting provisioned, what is the DNS name for the virtual machine, and now to this virtual machine that I have, I can go ahead and even connect to this virtual machine. So normally how do you connect to a server? You will do a remote desktop. The same thing, I can select the virtual machine, I can say connect, and this is going to create a ready-made RDP file, a remote desktop connection file for me, which I can save for me and start connecting to that virtual machine. So complete virtual machine gets provisioned for you based on the options that you have chosen, and then you have an option to restart, shut down, or you can even attach a new disk to the virtual machines. So while this gets provisioned, you can see you can create again images from here and then attach those VMs or use those images to go ahead and create your virtual machines. You can see automatically the disks are getting created. This is a disk which has got created, which is attached to the first virtual machine whose OS is Windows under what subscription, and then it also gives you what is the location where this virtual machine hard disk is actually stored. So this is how the disk gets created. And if I go back to the slide, this is precisely what I was trying to refer to. We chose a virtual machine, we chose the image for the virtual machine, and then that image got created while provisioning as a operating system disk. So going back to this, the virtual machine is created, initially it is stopped. So I quickly start my virtual machine so that I can go ahead and connect to this particular virtual machine. Similarly, we can go ahead and start or shut down the Linux virtual machine as well. Then I go ahead and create a virtual hard disk file. I select this, and if I want, I can go ahead and see the connections that I have established to this particular virtual machine. So I can see the CPU usage, I can see the disk. Right now you will not see anything because it's not, we are not connected. So I'm going to connect to the virtual machine, and to do that, you can see the details, what is the public IP address of the virtual machine, and you can also see the internal IP address. This is what you have got from the subnet that you have specified. It's that in that range. If you remember, the subnet was 10.1.0.0 to 10.1.0.8. That's where you got the IP address, internal IP address. This is the public IP address. So I go and connect. So it creates a RDP file which I can save, and then I can use from my laptop. I straight away connect to a virtual machine on the cloud. It is that easy. So it's going to try to connect to do that, and through RDP it's going to connect to the virtual machine, and I am able to log on to the virtual machine using the administrator password and the so provisioning is still in process, so that's where it will take some time. Once the provisioning is completed, you can go ahead and connect to that particular virtual machine. Okay, here you go. So I try to go ahead and connect to the virtual machine in a very similar way, the way I connect to any other machine on my network. Not only this, Linux machine also, you can see on the screen, I'm connected to the Windows Server 2008 virtual machine on the cloud, and this virtual machine is deployed on my virtual network. So because it's the first time I'm doing logging on this virtual machine, it's going to create my profile and do the other things. Similarly, I may want to go ahead and connect to the Linux part. What I can do is I can use this and use some client to go ahead and connect to that particular machine as well. So with this, you will see, again, this will take some time. So in the meanwhile, while this connection gets established over the network, you can see I have logged into the Windows Server 2008 virtual machine. And if you see this, you have two drives. One is your OS drive that you have the complete OS, and then you have a temporary storage which is used as a temporary disk. If you want to attach more disk, which you want to do, you can simply go ahead, go to your VM, and then you can select the VM that you want and create a new disk as well. You can go ahead and connect or create a new data disk. So once this completes, you can go ahead and attach a new disk that you want to create. So in this case, I want to simply go ahead and configure the details. You see the VM details is what you can see here. And while the connection is established, you can again go back and see what are the connections that we have done. So on this, you can check out. Now if you go to the monitor, you can see while I have established the connections, you'll see some network activity, you'll see some disk reader activity when I connect on to this virtual machine. So this is what the plan for today was. The plan for today was to give you an overview of what Windows Azure Infrastructure as a Service is all about, how to differentiate IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS, and also towards the end, talk about virtual machines, talk about virtual networks, and also demonstrate how these things happen on the Azure Cloud Faucet. So now we will move ahead for any Q&A that you probably have. I'll try to read the questions that has come in and then answer the questions over audio itself out here. The first question that I would like to take, I'm taking the questions in sequence. The first question that I would like to take is about sent by Rajaram Rao. The question is, do the VMs provide graphic card supports to run CAD/CAM CAE applications? Now, the way VMs are created is, the graphic card support definitely is supported out there. When you talk about installing the applications, first you need to install your CAD/CAM applications. Licensing is something that you have to manage on your own, point one. Point two, how much graphic card support does this application require? Unfortunately, I'm not very sure about that. But yes, there's a graphic card support. You can get the details of that on Microsoft Windows Azure / virtual machines. And you can check the compatibility of the virtual machine graphic card as against needed by your applications. Second question is from Sridhar. The question is, which versions does Windows Azure IaaS supports for Linux? So for Linux, you have a huge gallery, as I told you. There's almost 15 plus images which are available in the gallery of the Windows Azure IaaS for Linux. So that's where you can you can check out which version is required for you and what you have. So it's something which is from the open world. You create an image and you can upload it there in that gallery as well. So it's not something which is limited or which is in the scope of specific thing. It's an open thing that any image when you create, you can go ahead, get it verified and upload that onto it. Second question is about career in cloud computing from Sudhir. This will not be a right forum to answer this question. I will prefer that to answer technical questions in this particular forum as of now. So I'm sorry. I'm going to the next question from Nagesh. Nagesh Sawant is looking for do any other OS support in virtual machines? As of now, no. It's virtual machines which are out of box are Linux and Windows Server. In Windows Server, you have two options for Windows 8 and Windows 12. Another question from Kailas R. Kailas has, I guess, two questions. First question is about how does Azure take care of data security aspects across clients, subscribers, and the IP is not compromised by other. Now, when it comes to data security, Microsoft complies to the security norms given or the rules of the LAN for every location. So, depending upon where the data center is, you will have the data security norms in place. Security is what the data centers will take care of. At the same time, when it comes to data security, for services like Windows Web Role and Worker Role, they will store data into your SQL Azure. So Microsoft recommends that you encrypt your data as well before you store that into SQL Server. Next question is from Chandrakant. Chandrakant asks about, will Windows Azure provide a mechanism of load balancing between hybrid server networks and local servers plus cloud servers? To some extent, yes. As I mentioned, you can do load balancing between your VMs which you have deployed on the cloud. So if you have multiple VMs on the cloud, there is out-of-box support that Windows Azure provides you for load balancing. If you want to do load balancing between your Windows Azure and your on-premise network, I would recommend that you will have to implement that logic on a DNS and get it load balanced. Out of box, I don't see any option which Microsoft provides for doing load balancing across sites. Next question from again from Rajaram Rao. Can a customer VM template with add-on applications be hosted and reused? Yes. Whatever VMs you create, you can templatize that, you can create a template out of it, and those can be used by you whenever you create new VMs next time. If you want those VMs to be public, then you have to go to the Microsoft VM depot and you can contribute your VMs out there as well. There's a question from Aminesh Das. Question is, can the system that we are using be connected to the VPN created in Azure? That's right. So when you create a virtual private network, the one that I showed, your VM right now, which I created, was on the was on the virtual network, which was there. So yes, so your VMs, like I showed you in the demo, can sit on the VPN. Next question is from Ashok Damelia. What is the minimum requirement for a customer to connect their user and use VM on Azure? If the requirement is just to connect, then it's nothing. You need an internet connection, you need the user ID, password, and the protocol and the port number. The user ID, password, protocol, and the port number to go and connect to the VM. Like I did in this session, I created my own VM, and from my machine, I did that. Even if you can do, if you have the credentials for my VM. Can we have a snapshot of the VM and use this as to launch a new VM? Yes, that's the template option that you can use. You can create a template from your existing VM. Next question from Harvinder. Is there any training and certification available on Microsoft Cloud? Yes, there are 2 certifications available on Windows Azure. You can go to microsoft.com/certifications and you can get to know what are those 2 certifications. 483 is one number and other I don't recollect offhand. So there are 2 certifications available on Microsoft Azure. Question on Rajendra, what kind of security will Azure platform give? I've already answered this question from a security perspective. Next question is from Manishankar Bhattacharya. How do we upload application in Windows Azure virtual machine? It's the way you will have to transfer to install the applications. If there are the applications, you can create a script and run that script on the VM, which will download and do a silent installation on it. Else, the other way to install or upload application is you upload data using FTP, onto that VM. Another option is to put that into a storage like blob and access it from your VM. So multiple options are available to do that. Next question, for 200 GB, how many nodes are required? How does it take long to process? Sheshadri is asking a question, for 200 GB, how many nodes are required? And how long it takes to process text? The question, I don't feel it's a bit complete, but yes, to understand from it and mention what I've understood. Yes, as I showed you, you can attach extra data disk, from 1 GB to 1 terabyte. So you can simply go ahead, create a 200 GB disk and attach it to your VM. The single disk will be sufficient. Next question. There is a 3 months trial for Windows Azure. Yes, that's correct. Shri Kumar, that's right. Whether the charges will be till that period? No. For the 3 months, there will be no charges for the services that you use, which are free. And after that, your charges will start incurring. There are 2 questions from Pradeep. Question first. How about internet connections on VM? How will Microsoft charge on this? And what is that is maintained by them? The internet connections, the VMs are available on the internet, so the VMs can access the internet as well. If you want the VM to be exposed as different endpoints, yes, you have an option on Windows Azure where you can create multiple endpoints. By default, the VM which I created had one endpoint for remote desktop using the TCP. Similarly, you can create a HTTP endpoint and start connecting to that as well. Second question from Pradeepa, again, how can we install and maintain softwares? I think I've answered this question earlier as well. Another question from Harvinder Gill, does Microsoft allow for third party or the client auditor to audit IaaS and PaaS used for the client? For PaaS, no. PaaS is where you don't have a control, but for IaaS, you have a control of the entire VM. So through that thing, you can get the VM audited for your software. Next question from Ranjan. Will we be dependent on MS to get domain name for all my applications hosted on the VM? Yeah, if you have a domain name, you can register this, use the same, else you'll have to get it from the Microsoft. So basically all domain names that you get from Microsoft will be suffixed by a standard Microsoft prefix name. What you can do later is you can use the DNS mapping option. Can you create a CNAME and map your custom domain name to what Microsoft have given? That's the answer to question from Ranjan. Do we have a REST API? Yes, we do have a REST API support. Using VPN, can I connect to VM from my local network? Yes, that's something, Santosh, which I did right now. I created a VPN, I created a virtual machine, and I connected that virtual machine from my network itself. So I'll take these last three questions. There's a question from Sridhar, Paladugu, and Sarika. The question from Sridhar is, would there be a difference in outcome of security testing / assessment done on an application before hosting the cloud? In short, is it recommended to do assessment after hosting? Yes. There are security guidelines and security testing guidelines which you have to follow before and after testing. Question from Paladugu, do we have an option for duplicating the VM? The way to duplicate a VM is to create a template from the VM, or what you can also do is you can create a new VM from an existing VSD. So there are two options that you can do. Backups you don't need because the VMs are getting stored in a virtual hard disk into the Windows Azure storage. Last question from Sarika. Can we use VMs created by end users? Can we use VMs created by end users for hosting application? So treat VM as a normal machine. So if you have credentials and admin access on that, definitely you can. Otherwise, it's something we do not recommend. So that's the end of all the questions. Thank you all for attending this session, and you can view the recording of this session and the question and answer discussion as well from the TechGeek site itself. So thanks, and we are closing the session for now. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much for the insightful presentation, Mr. Nilesh. I'm really thankful to you for conducting this webinar. It was indeed a great session. I would also like to thank all our participants for their support in making this webinar a success. The recording of this session would be available on techgeek.com by tomorrow. Thank you all. Have a great evening.